So I am here today with Dr. Monica Chadha, and I'll introduce myself first, and I'll have you introduce yourself, Monica. My name is Alexandra Perry, and I'm the outreach coordinator for the University of Arizona School of Journalism. And Monica, can you tell me a little bit about yourself and what your position is here at the journalism school?
Hi, my name's Monica Chadha, as you've repeated several times. I am an associate professor of journalism at the School of Journalism. Where else will I be? And a little bit about myself and my position here. I am a tenured professor, and what that means is I work on independent scholarship, as well as original scholarship, and I teach and I serve the school and the university. So I do all of those three things. I came here from ASU. Don't hold that against me. But spent a great 8 years there, and now just finished a fabulous 1 year here. Um, Before that, I was a professional journalist in India for over 10 years. Started pretty young, so I got a chance to work in newspaper newsrooms, and then moved on to joining the BBC in 1999, and then I quit in 2007 to pursue a PhD at UT Austin. When Texas calls, you answer. Uh,
I love so you said you started journalism really early. What got you excited about journalism from such a young age?
So here's the ironic part, right? I never wanted to be a journalist. It was not on the agenda. I was going to be a pilot or a bureaucrat. That was the plan. But it's a really weird story. My coach, I was in athletics at the time, and my coach had just joined as the CEO of this upcoming newspaper that was launched. And he was looking for interns for the summer. And he was asking someone else, and I overheard him, and I told him, I'll intern in the newspaper. And that was only because I wasn't traveling anywhere that summer, and I wanted something to do with my time. So he invited us to the office the next day. My first assignment, I remember, was typing an 800-word article, and I'm talking 1995. I'd never seen a typewriter before, let alone a computer. And so here I'm sitting there with like two fingers. Took me 8 hours, but I was hooked, and I was like, okay, I think I can do this. Then they offered me a feature because I was very young. I was 16 at the time, and they did not want me to do politics. So they said, well, why don't you do this feature? So I wrote the feature. They were very pleased. I still remember my editor's words. She said, the girl can write, put her on the paper. And that's how I got my break. I do have a features background, and that's because they just thought I was too young to do breaking and political stories, which is unfortunate because I see so many young journalists here getting those breaks early on and really learning how to write hard-hitting stories, which I think is fantastic and so important to really get a holistic experience of journalism. So I feel like I missed out on that, but I'm so glad that students get that experience here.
Okay, well, now that we know a little bit more about you, Monica, I'd like to get into your background a little bit. So I'm interested to know, obviously you have a love for journalism, but why did you decide specifically to obtain a PhD in journalism? Because I noticed in your previous education, you had a BA and an MA in political science and then a master of philosophy.
So basically, that Master of Philosophy is because in India we follow the British system. And the way that works is, so after 10th grade is a +2, which is 12th grade, which is high school here. Our undergrad is only 3 years versus the 4 years that
Oh,
folks do in the US. So that was my BA. And then I have wanted to study in the US from the time I was 16 years old. I think the marketing folks, they would send these fantastic brochures. I would see people like students lolling on grass, and you would see these fantastic campuses, great buildings. And I was like, I want to do that. So clearly not looking at the classroom photos, I was looking at the students lolling on the lawns, and I was like, that looks great. I want to be there. So I've always wanted to study in the US from the time I can remember. In fact, I applied several times before a PhD, but I didn't have funding. And plus, journalism as a degree doesn't really have much funding. Anyway, so as my career was picking up, I continued my education on the side just to make sure that I didn't miss out on that. And plus, I had a tiger mom at home who was like, both my kids, I have an older sister, and she said, both my kids are going to be a master. Like, they will at least, like, that was her bare minimum, a master's degree. Because she was like, I have a master's degree. How can my kids be less educated than me? They have to be more educated than me. And so master's was like, I think from the time I was a kid, it was just a given that a master's degree was the minimum. Like, we didn't stop after the bachelor's. And then because I wanted to come to the US, I applied for a master's program, but and so I got into a top-notch postgraduate university in Delhi. It's probably one of the few ones that offer a lot of social sciences and humanities, MPhil and PhD degrees. And so I got in there, and I continued with my MPhil. And then I moved back to Mumbai. This was in Delhi, and I moved back to Mumbai. So then I'm contemplating, okay, where do I want to go in life? What do I want to do? And I remember talking to a friend, and she said, well, if you want to do a PhD, or if not now, then when? And I said, you're absolutely correct. So then I applied, and I got in to UT Austin. So I think a PhD was more of a getting a terminal degree. I really never wanted to get into academia. And in retrospect, my whole plan was I was going to finish my PhD and go back to work. I just wanted the PhD for me. To be able to say I'd gotten a terminal degree in this subject. And also, you don't have PhDs in journalism in India at all. It's not a program that's offered. In fact, no research programs in journalism are offered in India at all. It's a very professional degree. And when I was there, it's only now that you're seeing more degrees in media and journalism in India. When I was there, there were like two or three programs tops in Mumbai, which is like the financial capital of the country.
Right.
So there were only three professional programs. And by then, I knew the folks who were teaching them. I considered myself a better reporter than them. So I wasn't really going to go to someone to learn journalism when I was already doing it for a top-notch organization. Yeah, but then I took too long to finish my PhD, so I'm here giving the interview because I took very long to finish my program. And by then, the industry had imploded, and I was like, wait a minute, there's no job to go back to. And if I've taken this long for a PhD, I might as well try my hand at academia. So I'm still here.
So the industry had imploded, as you had said, when you wanted to go back into journalism. So what did you decide you wanted to research in academia through journalism?
I became very interested in this phenomenon of hyperlocal news sites. They were brand new, they were local, they were coming up in neighborhoods and this was surprising to me. Newspapers and the news, despite all of the misinformation and disinformation, are still doing pretty well. I think they're dropping in numbers, but not as bad as the US. So in fact, most countries look to the US to see, okay, we're going to get there when newspapers will lose in importance. And so what does that mean? Like, how is the US dealing with it? And so we can do the same. But they're not there yet. And India's one of them. And so while I was struggling for for this for a topic, I realized I was interested in hyperlocals, and then even more than that, I was interested in the transition that a lot of these journalists who were starting these hyperlocal sites, right? I mean, they found themselves out of jobs. Suddenly, they were living in communities where there was no news. So imagine, I mean, I suppose it's easy to imagine now because most of the folks get their news on their cell phones. But imagine you woke up one morning and your cell phone had no news.
Mm.
So, there was nothing there. So it's sort of like similar to those with newspapers. You wake up one morning and your community newspaper's gone. There's no way to know what's going on. There's no way to know who's running for which office, where do you get what, which event is taking place. And so you had a lot of these concerned community members coming together. So in some cases, community members, in some cases, former reporters. And I was very interested in their transition into this entrepreneurial role.
Mm.
Because journalists are supposed to be very away from business, but now they were starting their own media business. And so, how were they transitioning into this entrepreneurial role?
Wow.
And similarly with community folks, it was interesting to see how they identified themselves as media people or news people. And there's so much gray in my dissertation because even just determining what is a hyperlocal news site is up for debate, right? What is local? I
Yeah.
remember I had someone, there were two founders of one website, and one founder said, the kind of work we do, if we were a newspaper, we'd be local. There's nothing hyper local about us. And then the other founder said, yeah, we're a hyper local site. That's what we are. So, when there was sort of like it was so up for debate, and
Mm.
then the identity construction was up for debate as well. So that's kind of what I got interested in.
Mm.
So I did my work on that. Then I started looking at these new startups a little bit more, the practices that they follow, partly stemming from the question that if I'm traditional media and I've left, then who has replaced me? What journalism are they doing? What kind of stories do they publish? How do they sustain themselves? And these became important questions for the field as well, because it was more of a, can any of these websites help us crack the revenue code, which is how can we get the interest of the community? How can we get more revenue? How can we make sure that the ones that are struggling to survive? And now slowly from that, I've veered towards entrepreneurial journalism in the sense that looking at startups in the media industry, news industry, just examining what's going on. My research after coming to U Arizona has also taken on a little bit of a global shift thanks to the work I do. So we did a workshop on entrepreneurial journalism with Yemeni students, which was amazing. So I think working with students in general, I know that working with Yemeni students was part of a grant, but what we have done is for Glow, we've set up a 7-week media entrepreneurship course. So we're definitely spending more time there. There are more readings. We're dealing with different facets. We're building in opportunities for engagement. I'm asking them to do the kind of work where they're interviewing entrepreneurs, learning about stuff for themselves. We're asking them to ideate, design their own venture.
Mm.
So I think we're doing that. And then as a follow-up, we're also designing a sustainability, like a media sustainability course in which we discuss what are the different revenue and business models that many startups follow, what works, what doesn't work, do they have any strategies for, how would they try and earn revenue with their startup. I mean, that's, if you take both of those, that's about 14 weeks, a whole semester worth of work. So I think from this experience, we realized that there's clearly a market for students wanting to know more about entrepreneurship. And it's a good way to lure them into journalism. And if they love it enough to, invest time, money, and effort and create a new media startup, that would only help, with dispersing important information to society.
In your personal view, what is a journalism startup that you're kind of looking at right now? And you maybe some business models that you're interested in, because I know that this is a question that's like constantly being considered right now in journalism, is the business model. So what are you looking at right now?
That's a great question. And I think in some ways, that's also part of the problem. We use very traditional measures to understand what a business model is. We use very traditional language. Like, for example, I think one of the limitations of every entrepreneurial study I do is I say we have defined it with very traditional parameters. It's not open, which means we might be missing out on some websites that could possibly be doing great work, but don't fall within those traditional parameters. Right now, we're looking at media entrepreneurship in Yemen. And it was interesting. We were talking with our collaborators and asking them for independent media. Now, independent media here is considered the non-legacy, the ones that are started by individuals, the ones that don't have any corporate or political affiliation. And the Yemeni folks were thinking of independent media as objective media, like not being influenced by. So it was interesting that even the term independent media needs to be explained within that context. And so currently I'm looking at how they do journalism there. What are these entrepreneurial startups? We're exploring resilience amongst these independent entrepreneurs. So in terms of the kind of business model, I think usually that becomes more incidental to my research. I'm more interested in the folks who are starting it and how they're sustaining it. And so by studying them and their decisions and what they're doing in their startups, I then sometimes get into the business model or revenue model. But research generally shows that community outreach is probably more important. The events work. And I think deep down, one of the things that I would like to test out a little bit more is sort of something that Silicon Valley folks do a lot, which is they have a design and it's an iterative process. Like within journalism, people always go ask people what kind of stories they want to listen to. But then there's journalism, but then there's research that shows that people don't engage with the stories that they say they want to listen to. I mean, they think that's important, but then they want to engage with stories that they wouldn't tell a researcher that that's what they want.
Right. Like they're like, I want politics, but actually they're watching videos about Real Housewives.
Exactly.
Right.
And so I don't know if asking them what they want is useful. I think asking them what they liked, disliked about a particular story, or really observing how they use it, or how they use the news, makes it more important, especially for community startups. If the whole idea is you want community buy-in. I've done so many papers on a measure that we like to use a lot is critical information needs. Like, are these websites serving the critical information needs of the community? And I was like, I've done stories on it, but then you're like, okay, then why is it that Facebook still is, I mean, right out there, TikTok or videos, clearly we're missing on something. I mean, maybe it's like broccoli and cheese versus and I know this sounds so fundamental, but honestly in my head it's a little bit more complex than that. It's there's more we don't know.
So what is your teaching style?
Maybe I've just gotten lucky that I've taught the kind of courses that don't require that, oh, you have to do a crime story, you have to do a political story. So say, for example, I want them to do a multimedia project and they say, all right, you want me to do this on the news story of the day, but I'm actually really interested in rock climbing. And I'd be like, that's fine, go do rock climbing, I mean, so long as you can tell a good story about rock climbing, you can, you learn the multimedia that you need to be able to tell that good story and tell it across different formats. I don't particularly care that it's not a breaking news story or an important news story. On the other hand, I often had students sometimes who would want to do like the story on the homeless. And I know that they're setting themselves up for a really, really tough assignment that's not going to go well. But I let them do it anyway, because I think part of the experiential learning is also learning what you can and cannot do in the time constraints that you have. So I tend to guide them, but I kind of pretty much leave it open. And it's worked well this far.
It's a tough time right now to not only be a young person, but also to be a young person in media. So any words of encouragement for them?
This worked for me, and probably this is the best advice that I can give anyone. Whatever it is that you choose to do, just be the best at it. Just give it your all, so that when you walk away from it, like whatever it is, if you want to, I mean, one of my students, I remember, and I was talking to them last semester, we were talking about, stuff careers, and this person was like, I just want to be doing XYZ. And I was like, whatever it is that you choose to do, you should be the best at it. I think our world currently encourages and appreciates expertise. So I would say really work hard on doing good work. Like, you see, I read, I mean, I'm personally interested in like work processes, organization work, and you read so much about, folks checking out. You're right about, things being difficult for young people. They have nothing to look forward to, but I don't know. I mean, you still have a whole day to look forward to every day, and you can try and give it your best every day. It doesn't have to be like, what am I doing 10 years from now? But at the end of today, did you feel that you were the best at what you could be? Whether that's social loafing, whether that's lolling on the grounds, whether that is like, did you do it to the best of your ability? If the answer is yes, check that off for success, and then tomorrow is a whole new day.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much, Monica, for your time and for doing this faculty spotlight. I'm very much looking forward to posting it on our social media.